mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic.
Hey everybody, welcome back to One Mic, where I watch shit so you don't have to. And today I'm here to talk about the new Netflix limited series Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story. You know, I'm doing something a little different here because I hadn't planned on reviewing this. I generally don't review Netflix shows, and it's not because I have anything against Netflix shows. It's just because of the nature of how they release stuff is difficult for me. You know, I try to do episode by episode reviews of most of the shows that I cover, and that's too tricky to do when Netflix releases them all at one time. And then on the opposite end of that spectrum, if I want to watch the whole thing and get a review out, it's going to take too long because it's like, how long is it going to take me to get through 10 episodes of a Netflix show when I'm watching however many other things at the same time? So it's like, okay, if I watch all 10, 12, 13 episodes, by the time I'm done with it, getting the video up, it's not even going to feel timely anymore. But this just came out. I was able to get through it fairly quickly, and I thought it was so good that it was worth hopping on here and telling you guys about it. So I'm going to talk about it in a non-spoilery fashion, even though, I mean, it's based on real events, so you can go get yourself spoiled if you please. But I want to talk about this because I think that this series does a few things that I think are not just interesting, but pretty important. For one, it's a great series, I think. You know, it's 10 episodes. I think the first 8 are really strong, really compelling episodes. The last 2 are necessary. They are important. They need to be there. But just because of the nature of the show, they're just not going to be as compelling as the first 8. The last 2 kind of deal with like the fallout of everything that Jeffrey Dahmer did up until essentially getting caught and going to trial, going to prison, etc. And those last 2 episodes kind of focus on like his trial, how that trial affected the families of the people he killed, his time in jail, like all that kind of stuff. And you need that to give proper perspective, right? You want to showcase the consequences for Jeffrey Dahmer for what he did. You want to showcase how that impacted the family of his victims, even once it was all settled, how that impacted the family of his victims. And even in a more interesting sense, I think, I take that back. Not a more interesting sense, but more interesting in the sense of like, this is something that isn't often considered that the show entertains, which I then found to be interesting, which is how his behavior impacted his parents, and how once he goes to jail for what he did, and it's fully out there what he did, and no one can pretend like they don't know, how these people dealt with that. And that, to me, I think is the most interesting and compelling aspect of this series that I think really makes it worth watching, because it's what takes this from, you know, if you're somebody who just wants to watch some serial killer shit and you want to see some grisly deaths and you want to learn more about one of the most infamous serial killers in history, yeah, sure, you can get that here, but you can get that in most places, you know, where you just want to, if you just want to watch any old thing about any old serial killer, you can get that. You can scratch that itch. But what I think makes this show special is the fact that it deals with all of these internal things. Like, it deals with Dahmer, and let me be clear here when I talk about this. I'm not saying, as some people have asserted, that they haven't asserted that I've said it because this is my first time saying it, but as some people have asserted that the show kind of attempts to make Dahmer into a sympathetic character, and I don't think that's the case. What I think makes this series great, and what I think this show is doing here, it's not meant to make you feel sympathetic or feel sorry for Dahmer. I think it's an attempt to answer the question of why. What would drive someone to do something like this? And it could be any number of factors. So if you look at like the show showcasing the nature of his relationship with his parents and the behavior of his parents, it's not saying, hey, look, Jeffrey Dahmer had shitty parents. Maybe that's why he ends up eating motherfuckers. Like, no, that's not why. A lot of people have shitty parents. I'd wager that like 7 out of 10 people might got shitty parents. Even if they are raised with, you know, in a good situation, they might just have parents who don't give them enough care, don't give them enough attention, whatever the case may be. But a lot of people have shitty parents. They don't end up eating motherfuckers. Like, what it's meant to do is to show you that if you have an individual like Jeffrey Dahmer who's probably got a couple of screws loose already, having parents who are largely absent is only going to make things worse. It's only going to exacerbate whatever issues he already has. And then when you have that, if you are that parent and you know that you were absent. You know that you failed your kid or you weren't around or that you have issues that you should have shared with your kid that they didn't know about that might have driven them to go to therapy. Whatever the case may be, now you as a parent, you have to grapple with that. What role did you play in in all of these lost lives? And I love the fact that this show deals with that and shows us what these parents had to deal with, the grandparents had to deal with, the family members of the victims had to deal with. All that stuff was super compelling, super necessary, and I came away from this not thinking like, oh, I understand Jeffrey Dahmer better. No, I came away with this even more sympathetic toward not just the victims' families, but to his own parents, even though his parents were fucking shitty. Like, I, as a parent, can understand and relate to now even more the idea of if your kid does something fucked up, and it doesn't have to be Jeffrey Dahmer level of fucked up, just any level of fucked up, what role did I play in making that happen? And if you end up with somebody who's on the extreme on a scale of 1 to 10, a full ass 10 on that scale of fucked up stuff, how much worse is that for you as a parent to, if you're a halfway decent person, to think about like, not even what I could have done differently, but you already know you fucked up. How badly do you have to like fuck up and not want to just, I don't want to say anything crazy, but like, I feel like his parents have a level of guilt and responsibility that I feel like most people just would not be able to grapple with. And we even see his mother struggle to contend with this to a more serious degree than his father. But his father contended with it, I think, at least as the show shows me, in a much more intimate sort of way. So, yeah, I think that's one of the many reasons that I think this show is great. Let me see. What's some of the things that I want to talk about here? I actually kind of talked about most of the things I want to talk about right here at the top, because I did find all of that to be the most compelling stuff. But like I said, though, you know, what this show does do is it shows you that if you have someone with issues like Dahmer, those sorts of things can have a greater impact, like parents not being around, not having friends, or having people who befriend you and hurt you. Like, these are all things where we can all sit here and be like, I've dealt with that. But at the same time, you haven't dealt with that when you're already coming in behind the 8 ball because you have whatever kind of mental issues that you might have just inherited. You know, you don't even have any choice over it. It's not a nurture thing. It's a nature thing. You don't really have any kind of say. So, yeah, I already mentioned the parent stuff. Most of my notes I've already talked about just off the top of my head. So I'm just going to move on to some of the other stuff I liked. And then one of the things that I had a problem with initially, and I still think it is a flaw in the show, but something that it has its moments and it has its utility. So I've already talked about how I love how it deals with the consequences and the feelings of responsibility. I also want to talk about some of the performances here, because I think, you know, everyone's going to talk about Evan Peters, and Evan Peters was fucking incredible, dog. Like, there are some incredibly intense scenes. And when I say intense, I don't mean like because they're grotesque or because they're graphic, just really suspenseful stuff. And it's all because of just the way Evan Peters just eats up everything. The moment this character enters the room, everything is drawn to this guy. He does such a great job. And you know, I try not to be hyperbolic. I try not to throw around these early ass hot takes like, oh, some shit just came out. I'm like, oh, this is going to win the Oscar. But it really will be a travesty if this guy doesn't at the very least get an Emmy nomination. And it's early on. We just had the Emmys like 2 weeks ago, maybe, if that. But yeah, probably about 2 weeks ago. And I'm already talking about the Emmys is going to be in another 50 weeks. But fuck, man, like, what a performance by this guy. Niecy Nash, incredible. Great job. I love what they did with her. You know, again, talking about consequences and responsibility and these feelings of what did I do wrong or what could I have done differently. Her character has to contend with living next door to him and carrying that guilt of, could I have done more? Even when she did everything she could possibly do, she did more than I would say most people would have. And as high and mighty as I want to paint myself, she probably did more than I would have. I probably would have done a little bit and then be like, you know what, let me fucking move before some shit pop off and I'm next. You know, like, that's what I would have done. But like, she has such a nurturing aspect of herself and of her nature that she really wants to try to not just save these people she's seeing going in and out, but save him to some degree, you know. And she being Niecy Nash, I think I really underestimated her as an actress. She does an incredible job on this show, and I think she does a great job of conveying that that feeling of I have to do something with, but am I doing enough? Am I doing enough? Even if I'm calling the police 17 times in a month, is that enough? Should I have called 18? Should I have called 19? You know, that kind of stuff. She did a great job with that. Unrecognizable to me until I randomly looked it up thinking it was somebody else. But Molly Ringwald is in this. I don't know where they got her from. I haven't seen Molly Ringwald in anything in a long time. She plays Dahmer's stepmother in this. A pretty irritating character to me, I think. And I think that's unintentional, but I think it's strictly a me thing that finds her irritating. But she does a great job as well. Awesome seeing Molly Ringwald again. Richard Jenkins as his father crushes it as usual. I'm going to talk a little bit more about him in a minute. Episodes 7 and 8, I think, are the best episodes of this series. Episode 7, I can't really get into detail about without spoiling it. And when I say spoiling it, I mean, like, I feel like what makes this episode great, if I shared it with you ahead of time and you haven't watched it, it's going to lessen the impact that the episode has on you. But I will just say this episode takes a different approach to one of Dahmer's victims. A lot of these episodes, by the way, are framed around specific stories, like this specific victim or this specific situation. And episode 7 revolves around one of his victims, and it showcases the nature of this particular victim and this person's relationship with Jeffrey Dahmer. And it's a thing that makes you really, really think about how, like, kind of like the butterfly effect, how the idea is like a butterfly flaps its wings and something crazy happens somewhere far as shit. I don't know the fucking exact verbatim text of the fucking rule, but like how one small action that seems insignificant at the time can have a massive fucking impact. Because you watch that episode and you think, if one or two things had gone differently, this guy is alive, and maybe Dahmer is different, changed, does things differently going forward. And again, when we're entering into a show where we already have a perception of this guy, assuming you already do have a perception of this guy, you might be watching this and have no idea what you're in for. But if you're watching this and you're familiar with Jeffrey Dahmer, you know what he did, you already have a perception of him. Watching episode 7, you're going to look at that and you're going to go, maybe he was this close to being redeemable. Maybe he was this close to changing his ways and turning out different. And all of these things where you just like you look at him in a different light. And not, when I say in a different light, I don't mean bad versus good. I mean, you just might look at it as like, before I had a very closed-minded, just this is who he was kind of outlook on him. Now you have a more robust 3D picture of who this guy was. You probably do and still should hate him, but you understand that he's more than just a psychopath who did what he did. You understand a little bit more of why he did what he did, and a little bit more of it wasn't just a black and white thing for him. So I think that what they did there, I think, really worked with episode 7. And then episode 8 spends a lot of time on his father. And like I said, Richard Jenkins crushed that role. And that episode spends a lot of time dealing with what I've already spoken about, which is the impact on the parent. But it focuses in specifically on the father. And I think that's a combination of not just who the father was and what interactions the father had with Jeffrey, but also just giving this actor the opportunity to continue to show out. Because the mother doesn't appear much in the show. The stepmother appears more than the mother, but not as much as the father. And what we see, we get to see this father, the actor, Richard Jenkins, who plays his father, we get to see him do a lot of great work here. And I really like the fact that episode 8 really just felt like a showcase for him to really show out and for us as an audience to really have to sit and think about what it would be like to be Jeffrey Dahmer's father. So great stuff there on episode 8 too. So those are my favorite episodes of this series. A couple of quick notes. In episode 7, the victim is a deaf guy, and I recognize this guy from Deaf U, which is a reality show that's on Netflix currently, and it follows like a bunch of kids going to this college for deaf people, and just how they interact, like college life at a school for all deaf people. And the actor in this was on that show. He's a fucking like kind of a douchebag, kind of like ladies man kind of dude, like not really likable, and he can talk, but he doesn't talk in this. And he put on a lot of weight, and weight isn't like size, like muscle, like he's not fat, but like, you know, he put on a lot of weight for this role, it seems. He does great in it, so I thought that was cool. And same episode 7, his mother is played by the woman who played Jewel on Fresh Prince, which, I mean, you'd have to be a pretty seasoned Fresh Prince viewer, but Jewel was Jazz's wife on that show. She pops up later in its run, so that was cool seeing her as well. So the one thing that I want to wrap up talking about is my one issue with my one issue with the show. You know, I said episodes 9 and 10, the last 2 weren't as good as the first 8, but they were still good, but you're just not going to be as compelling dealing with the fallout as you are going to be dealing with the shit that's actually happening. So, but I don't look at those 2 episodes as flaws. But my one issue with the show is that this show jumps around its timeline, Jeffrey's timeline, more often than not, sloppily and unnecessarily, to the point of confusion, where it's sometimes, like, there was a point where I gave up trying to figure out where I was at relative to the previous scene. I'm like, you know what, I don't even give a fuck anymore. Like, they're gonna jump ahead 15 years, and they're gonna jump back 7 years, and we're gonna be all over the fucking place. And I really did get to a point where I was just like, I don't even care anymore. I'm just gonna watch it, because I'm tired of trying to figure out, Am I ahead of this murder? Am I behind this murder? Did this happen before? Have we already seen this? Have we already seen that? It's a clusterfuck with how much they jump all over the timeline. But I will say there are a couple of instances where it does work, and it works to great effect. There's a moment where in the background of a scene inside a courtroom, if you're paying close enough attention, you can catch a tie-in to an earlier episode. I'll put it that way. And then I think that works because when you see these individuals in the courtroom, when you can make that tie back to what you saw in a previous episode, it kind of helps you understand how crazy it was, how the shit actually played out. Whereas if it had played out in a chronological order, it might not have felt as crazy. When you see it out of order, you're kind of just like, yo, that really is a wild fucking coincidence. And not even just a coincidence, but like a wild fucking just like set of circumstances that led you to this place. It's crazy. And there's another great use of this as well, where they do this with the father. Early on in the season, I want to say maybe episode 2 or something like that, we see the father being told about what Jeffrey did. Is like, yo, your son's been arrested. He's doing, you know, this show actually in general starts at the end. And then it kind of like works its way, not just back, but like around, but all within the past. So in episode 2, we see the father struggling to deal with hearing for the first time what his son has done. And just as a regular human, you can relate to that. The idea of being a parent and being told for the first time that your kid did the shit that Jeffrey Dahmer did, and how that's going to affect you emotionally. We then see events play out over the course of the next 5 or 6 episodes. And then at a point in episode 8, we come back to that moment when he's first being told what Jeffrey did and him reacting emotionally to it. And because of the events that take place in between, that now means a lot more when you see it the second time. And then it means even more when new information is brought to the table afterward. So like that, in those instances, those are a couple instances where it was used to great effect, but by and large, it's a confusing clusterfuck that I didn't need. So that's all I got for this one. Like I said, I didn't want to be spoilery. I want to give people an opportunity to get my thoughts and make a decision whether or not they want to watch it. It's intense. It's suspenseful. I would say it's actually rarely graphic. People say it's a hard watch, and it is, but that's because they do a lot of great suspense work here. It's not terribly graphic. I've seen worse. But yeah, great stuff. I want to give you guys that opportunity to get my thoughts. Let me know what you thought if you watched it, and I will see you guys whenever I see you guys. I don't know. I gotta do a video for the patient. I'll see you guys shortly later today with that video. So until then, peace.